Back in the summer of 2023, I experienced one of the most unnerving and scary nights of my entire life. To this day, I still cannot fully explain what happened in that house, and it completely changed the way I look at being alone. I have never liked staying home by myself, but after what occurred on that weekend, I do not think I have ever stayed overnight anywhere alone again. At the time of this story, my fiancé Ryan and I were looking to buy our very first house. Our lease was about to expire on our apartment, and we really did not want to sign another full-year lease, just to end up breaking it early if we found a place to buy. We were looking at properties every single weekend, but the housing market was incredibly competitive and stressful. Then, my dad stepped in to help. One of his oldest and closest friends owned a house in the local area that was currently sitting completely empty and available to rent. The previous renters had unfortunately passed away recently, so the owner was looking for someone reliable to occupy the space. Since my dad had such a tight, long-standing relationship with the owner, the man agreed to let Ryan and me move in and rent the place for a very cheap monthly rate. On top of that, he told us we could stay there as long as we needed to. Basically, we were renting month to month in a very nice, established neighborhood in a beautiful part of town. It took a massive amount of house hunting stress off of our shoulders, and we were incredibly grateful. But there was just one major downside for me. I was not thrilled about the idea of moving into a house where both of the previous residents had died within just a few weeks of each other inside the house itself. They were very elderly, so it was not like some kind of vicious, violent crime had taken place there. But still, the thought of living in a house where two people had recently passed away just did not sit well with me. I am a very sensitive person when it comes to the energy of a house, and I easily get creeped out by things like that. Ryan, on the other hand, was completely unbothered. He did not care at all about the history of the house. He was just incredibly excited about the cheap rent and the fact that we were saving money. He is the type of person who does not believe in bad energy, ghosts, or anything paranormal. I, on the other hand, definitely do. I remember when we first moved our boxes into the house, Ryan would constantly tease me and mock me for being so paranoid. He would even walk around the corners of the house and make ridiculous ghost sounds just to mess with my head. Do not get me wrong, Ryan is a wonderful partner and a great guy. I know I might be making him sound like a bit of a jerk, but he was really just trying to lighten the mood, because he knew how anxious I was. He has always been a big joker, and sometimes you just have to roll your eyes and ignore him when he gets like that. But despite his jokes, I still felt a heavy weight in my chest every time I walked through the front door. When we first moved in, the entire house was covered in this really ugly, faded tan carpet. It was stained in several places and just looked incredibly old and worn down. My dad's friend, the landlord, told us right away that he was planning to have a professional crew come over to tear all the carpet out and install brand new hardwood floors. He apologized for the state of the carpet, explaining that it was just too stained to keep. In the living room, right near the center of the space, there was one particularly large dark stain on the carpet. On our first day of moving boxes into the house, Ryan asked my dad's friend if he knew what had caused that specific stain. That was when the owner shared some information that I really wish I had never heard. He told us a very sad story about the elderly woman who lived there before us. She had suffered a terrible fall in the living room. During the fall, she hit her head extremely hard on the edge of a wooden end table. The dark stain on the carpet was from her blood. The emergency services were called, and she was rushed to the hospital that night. But unfortunately, she never recovered from her injuries and passed away. To make things even more tragic, the owner then told us that her husband had passed away just a couple of weeks before her accident. He had suffered a massive, sudden heart attack while he was down in the basement. Hearing all of this made my stomach sink. I was absolutely horrified by the idea of living in a house with that kind of history, even if it was just a temporary situation. But we had already signed the short-term lease, and logically, I knew we had to do what was most cost-effective for our future. We had only been living in the house for about 2 days when the flooring crew arrived to rip out the old carpet. I cannot even describe the wave of relief I felt when that awful tan carpet was finally gone, especially that dark stain in the living room. The landlord also hired a painter to refresh the entire interior of the house with a bright, clean coat of paint. Just those couple of minor cosmetic changes made the house feel significantly better and less ominous. After those updates, I actually started to settle in and feel a bit more comfortable. It also really helped that the landlord had installed a modern home security system. It was one of those systems that had door sensors, so every single time you opened an exterior door, an automated electronic voice would loudly announce, "Front door open" or "Back door open." It actually got annoying very quickly because of how repetitive it was. But even though it was irritating, it did give me a strong sense of safety and peace of mind. About a month passed, and I was starting to feel completely at home. But then, the weekend of July 7th arrived. Ryan was leaving town for his bachelor party, which meant I was going to be left completely alone in the house for the very first time. I was definitely feeling a bit on edge about being by myself for a couple of nights, but I kept telling myself that I was being ridiculous. The house felt like a home now, and I had the company of our cattle dog, Rex. Rex was a very loyal, protective dog, and having him around always made me feel secure. On Friday, July 7th, I woke up early and got ready for work. Before I left the house at 7 in the morning, I gave Ryan a kiss goodbye. He was planning to head out with his friends a few hours later, and would not be back until Sunday afternoon. I finished my shift at work and headed back home that evening. The moment I walked through the front door, I felt a strange, subtle shift in the air. I felt a bit off, like something was not quite right, but I was positive that I was just projecting my own anxiety about being home alone. To distract myself, I decided to order some spicy Thai food. Ryan absolutely hates Thai food, so I rarely get to eat it, and it is my absolute favorite. I sat on the couch, opened my food, and turned on my favorite comfort show, The Office. I just wanted to relax, eat my dinner, and let the familiar episodes calm my nerves. By the time midnight rolled around, I was starting to feel pretty tired. I was just about to turn off the television when I heard a very strange, distinct noise. It sounded like it was coming from directly beneath me in the basement. Since it was an older house, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself that the house was just settling and creaking in the cool night air. I turned off the TV, stood up, and started walking toward the bedroom. But then Rex suddenly jumped up from the rug. He ran straight to the basement door, pressed his nose against the crack, and began to bark aggressively. This was incredibly unusual behavior for him. Rex was a very protective dog, but he was normally extremely quiet. He almost never barked. Whenever he wanted to get vocal, he would usually just let out a soft, low howl. But on this night, he was barking with an intensity that I had never heard before. He sounded completely tense, like he was sensing some kind of immediate danger on the other side of that door. I walked over to him, gently petting his back and trying to console him, but he refused to calm down. His hair was standing on end, and he kept his eyes locked on the door. For some reason, in a moment of sheer adrenaline, I decided to slowly turn the brass doorknob and open the basement door. I reached my hand inside the frame and flipped the light switch, illuminating the wooden staircase. The moment the light turned on, Rex stopped barking, but he immediately began to let out a deep, menacing growl. My plan was to quickly walk down the stairs and just make sure that a window had not blown open or that nothing had fallen over. But right as I took a half step forward, I remembered what the landlord had told us. The previous owner's husband had died of a sudden heart attack right down in that basement. I know it sounds completely irrational, but that thought absolutely froze me in my tracks. A wave of pure, icy dread washed over me, and I felt completely paralyzed at the top of the stairs. I could not bring myself to take another step, and I could not even force my eyes to look down into the depths of the basement. Instead, I pulled out my phone, held it out over the stairwell, and snapped a picture with the flash on, hoping I could just look at the photo to make sure everything was fine. But when I looked at the screen, the basement was just too dark and deep, and the flash did not reach far enough to show anything useful. I was simply too terrified to go down there myself, especially with Rex continuing to growl at the empty space. I quickly pulled the basement door shut, locked it, and hurried into the bedroom. Eventually, Rex seemed to calm down a bit, and he followed me into the room. He was no longer barking or growling, but he refused to relax. Instead of curling up in his usual spot, he lay down right at the very foot of the bed, his eyes locked onto the closed bedroom door. He stayed in that exact position all night, completely alert and vigilant. Seeing my dog act like that scared me even more than his loud barking did. I slept horribly that night, waking up every hour, fully expecting someone or something to burst through my bedroom door at any second. When the morning light finally filtered through the windows, I felt exhausted but relieved to have made it through the night. I made myself a large cup of coffee and decided to get started on some household chores that I had been neglecting all week. I wanted to keep myself busy so I would not dwell on my fears. I gathered up all the dirty laundry from the hampers and walked down the hallway to the laundry room. But the moment I pushed the laundry room door open, I froze in absolute shock. What I saw might seem small and trivial to some people, but in that moment it terrified me beyond belief. Our heavy washing machine was sticking out from the wall by several feet. It was not just slightly askew or vibrating out of place. This massive, heavy metal appliance was sitting almost directly in the middle of the small room. My immediate physical reaction was to spin around and run out of the room. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding in my throat, trying to figure out how on earth something like that could have happened. A washing machine does not just walk itself into the middle of a room overnight, unless it was severely off balance during a spin cycle, but I had not run a load of laundry since the middle of the week. Once I finally managed to compose myself and stop shaking, I slowly walked back into the laundry room to inspect it. Aside from being dragged several feet away from the wall, nothing else in the room seemed out of place. The hoses were still attached, and there were no signs of water leaks. I grabbed the sides of the heavy machine and tried to push it back into its proper position. It was incredibly heavy, and it took a massive amount of physical effort to slide it back. I kept thinking to myself that if the machine had moved like that while I was home, I absolutely should have heard the loud, scraping sound of metal dragging across the floor. Even though I was now completely on edge and filled with an overwhelming sense of unease, I forced myself to keep going with the chores I had planned for the day. I needed to keep my mind occupied. Later that afternoon, I called Ryan and told him everything that had happened, from Rex barking at the basement door to the washing machine being mysteriously moved. I could tell from his voice that he was a bit skeptical and trying to find a logical explanation, but he was still genuinely concerned because he could hear how genuinely terrified I was. Ryan is just one of those pragmatic people who firmly believes that absolutely everything can be explained by science or simple logic. He told me that his group was planning to pack up and head back home first thing in the morning, which meant he would be back sometime in the late morning on Sunday, much earlier than they had originally planned. Knowing he was coming back early made me feel a little better, but I still could not shake the horrible cold feeling that was brewing deep inside my chest. Saturday night arrived, and the atmosphere in the house felt heavy and suffocating. I tried to repeat my routine from the night before, getting some food, cuddling up on the couch with Rex, and putting on The Office to keep the background noise going. At exactly 9:18 that night, a sudden, massive noise erupted from outside the house. It was so incredibly loud and violent that it made me jump completely off the couch. Even with the television volume turned up high, the sound was deafening, like a massive explosion had just occurred right outside my front door. A second later, my phone vibrated in my hand. I had received a motion alert notification from our garage security camera. With shaking hands, I opened the app and tapped on the recorded video clip. In the video, I could see that our heavy wooden garage door was wide open. This made absolutely no sense because we literally never used the garage door. We only used the garage for extra storage, and we always parked our larger vehicles in the driveway. But in the video, the door was fully open, and I could see bright, violent flashes of light illuminating the driveway. The video footage did not truly do the sound justice, but it sounded like high-powered fireworks detonating right next to the house. I took a deep breath, opened the interior door that led from the kitchen into the garage, and peered outside toward the driveway. I expected to see smoke, debris, or at least the cardboard remnants of fireworks, but there was absolutely nothing. The driveway was completely empty and silent, and there was zero evidence of any explosion or fireworks whatsoever. It was the strangest, most baffling thing I had ever witnessed. I saved the video clip to my phone, manually closed the garage door using the wall button, and went straight to the bedroom. Trying to get comfortable in bed after that was an impossible task. My heart was racing at a terrifying speed, and my brain was completely scrambled because I could not even process what I was actually afraid of. I could not tell if I was dealing with some kind of unseen paranormal presence in the house, or if there was an actual physical person outside playing some incredibly sick and elaborate prank on me. I got out of bed 3 separate times to walk around the house and double-check that every single window was locked and that the security alarm was fully armed. Just like the night before, Rex stood completely still at the foot of the bed, his eyes locked onto the door frame, occasionally letting out a very soft warning growl. Eventually, sheer exhaustion took over, and I managed to drift off into a light, fitful sleep. But my rest did not last long. I woke up suddenly to the sound of violent, heavy pounding on my front door. I gasped and looked down at the glowing numbers on my bedside clock. It was exactly 3:39 in the morning. Rex was standing up on the bed, his entire body stiff, but he was completely silent now, which was even more terrifying. Because I had closed the bedroom door tightly before going to sleep, he could not get out into the hallway. I lay completely frozen in the center of the bed, too terrified to move a single muscle even if I wanted to. The sound outside was not a normal knock. It was a continuous, rhythmic, and violent banging, as if someone was throwing their entire body weight against the wood. And then, the most terrifying sound of all echoed through the quiet house. From the main hallway, the automated voice of our security system calmly announced, "Front door open." My heart stopped. I leapt out of bed, ran to the bedroom door, and turned the lock just as fast as I physically could. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, desperately trying to press the power button to call the police, but the screen remained completely black. No matter how many times I pressed or held the button, the phone would not turn on. It was completely dead, which had never happened before. I think that was the exact moment I broke down and started to cry. I looked over at the locked bedroom door, and in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I could visibly see the brass doorknob slowly and violently shaking back and forth. Someone was standing right on the other side of that thin piece of wood, trying to get in. I lost all control and started screaming at the top of my lungs, "Go away, please just go away." I managed to find an old tablet on my desk that was connected to the local internet, and I used an emergency application to call the police. I hysterically told the dispatcher that someone had broken into my house and was trying to get into my bedroom. The police officers showed up incredibly fast, their blue and red lights flashing through my bedroom window. They searched the entire property and found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary except for one glaring detail. The front door of the house was standing wide open, swinging gently in the humid night air. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen from the living room, and there was absolutely no evidence of foul play or an intruder. I showed the officers the bizarre video from the garage camera from earlier that night, but they just shrugged and assumed it was probably some local teenagers setting off leftover fireworks, even though I pointed out that there was no physical debris left behind. As for the locked front door suddenly opening in the middle of the night, the lead officer calmly explained that it must have just been a strong gust of wind that blew it open. The wind on a humid, completely still July night had somehow managed to bypass a heavy brass deadbolt and shoot the door wide open. It was an incredibly dismissive explanation, but the police clearly just wanted to wrap up the call and leave. After they drove away, it was nearly dawn. I was too terrified to stay in that house for another second. I loaded Rex into the back seat of my car and drove straight to my parents' house, where I stayed until Ryan finally got home later that morning. When I told my parents and Ryan what had happened, they tried their best to comfort me, but I could tell they were silently agreeing with the police officer's logical explanations. Ryan did not believe I had experienced anything paranormal, but he did agree that something highly unusual had taken place, and he was deeply concerned for my safety. We ended up staying in that rental house for a couple more months until we finally found a house of our own to purchase. Thankfully, nothing strange ever happened in that house again during our remaining time there. Before that terrifying weekend, I had never experienced anything even remotely unexplainable, and nothing like that has ever happened to me since. We are now approaching the 3-year anniversary of that horrible weekend, and whatever it was that entered that house, I just hope I never have to experience anything like it ever again. And that brings us to the second story, which takes place in a completely different neighborhood, but with an equally terrifying encounter. I used to live next door to a local bar, and to be completely honest, I absolutely hated it. Thankfully, the bar was not directly adjacent to my property line. There was a thick, dense line of tall trees that ran all the way around the perimeter of the bar, which did give me a decent amount of privacy. However, if I was standing in my driveway and looked at just the right angle through the branches, I could literally see the side entrance of the building. That side entrance was the exact spot where all the patrons would go outside to hang out and smoke. Most of the time, the noise and the crowds were not too much of a bother, but on the weekends, or during nights when the local sports teams were playing, it became absolutely unbearable. It seemed like there was a major game happening every other day, and the noise would echo right through my walls. To make matters worse, at the time of this story, I was working a full-time retail job. Working in retail meant that I had to work almost every single weekend, so while the crowds at the bar were partying and screaming at the top of their lungs, I was desperately trying to get some sleep before my early morning shifts. It was an incredibly frustrating living situation, but out of all the annoying and loud nights I had to deal with over the years, there was one specific Saturday night that still sticks with me, and it is something that will probably haunt my memory for the rest of my life. It was a typical busy Saturday, and my best friend, Isla, was coming over to my place to hang out. Isla is like a sister to me. We have been inseparable since we were in elementary school, and we are still just as close today. Around the time this happened, Isla had made it her personal mission in life to set me up on a date with literally anyone she could find. This was back before online dating apps had completely taken over the world, so you actually had to meet people in person, which was a massive obstacle for me. I am an incredibly awkward and introverted person by nature, and I have always struggled with interacting with strangers. The mere thought of walking up to a random woman in public and trying to strike up a conversation seemed more terrifying to me than the most intense horror movie you could ever imagine. I am a self-proclaimed dork, and I am perfectly fine with that. I love my comic book collection, my various pop culture collectibles, and more than anything, I just love relaxing in the quiet comfort of my own home. But as you can probably guess, it is very difficult to meet potential partners when being a homebody is the biggest part of your personal identity. That was why Hila was constantly trying to act as the ultimate wingman for me. Her efforts were not going very well, though. She had managed to set me up on a few blind dates, but there was never any real spark or connection. So, on this particular Saturday evening, Isla came over to make dinner with me and just hang out for a few hours until her girlfriend finished her late-night work shift. We had a wonderful, relaxed evening, eating food and laughing. She spent a good portion of the night giving me her classic dating advice, teaching me specific icebreakers to try out the next time she forced me to go on a date. Around 10 o'clock that night, her girlfriend called her to say she was finally leaving work, so Isla started gathering her things. I walked her out to her car, parked in my driveway, to say goodbye. As I stood there, watching her taillights disappear down the street, the loud, chaotic noise from the bar next door came drifting through the trees. I glanced over toward the side entrance and noticed a group of about 7 or 8 women standing outside. They were clearly having a great time, drinking, laughing loudly, and talking over one another. I could hear one of the girls in the center of the group projecting her voice, telling some dramatic story to her friends. I just shook my head, smiled at the typical weekend chaos, and began to turn around to head back inside my house. But just as I spun on my heel, I noticed that one of the women in the group was staring directly in my direction. I paused, looking around my dark yard to see if there was perhaps someone else she could be looking at. But there was no one. It was very clear that her eyes were locked onto me. I did not react right away because I still was not entirely sure if she was just zoning out or actually looking at me. Slowly, the other women in the group finished their cigarettes and began to head back inside the bar, but this particular woman stayed behind. It was almost as if she was not actually part of their group, even though she had been standing right next to them. Then she raised her hand and waved. She had to be waving at me, as there was literally no one else standing in the dark driveway. I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to be rude, but also feeling a bit uncomfortable. Then she began to wave much more aggressively, swinging her entire arm back and forth. I slowly raised my hand and gave her a polite, hesitant wave back. The moment I did, she reacted by blowing a dramatic kiss in my direction. I just gave her a polite smile, turned around, and walked back inside my house, locking the door behind me. I figured she was just someone who had enjoyed a few too many drinks at the bar and was just being playful. After that strange interaction, I sat down in my living room and booted up my favorite video game. Since I actually had a rare weekend off from work, I could not think of a better way to spend my night than losing myself in a game for a few hours. Around 1:30 in the morning, a soft, distinct knock sounded at my front door. I immediately paused the game and listened closely. A second later, the gentle knock happened again. I was not particularly frightened by this, mostly because of how close I lived to the bar. Over the years, I had experienced random drunk people wandering onto my porch by mistake. Some people in our town really like to party hard, and I was pretty used to dealing with weird, minor incidents like this. Just in case it was someone who genuinely needed help, I stood up and walked over to the small decorative window next to the front door. I peered out into the darkness, but there was absolutely no one standing on the porch. At that moment, I felt reassured that it was just some idiot from the bar playing a quick prank and running away. My heart was beating a little faster, but only because a knock on the door at that hour of the night is always a bit startling. I decided not to go back to my video game right away. Instead, I sat down in the front room with my laptop to read some articles. About 15 minutes passed, and for some reason, a strange urge came over me to check the front window one more time, just to satisfy my curiosity and make sure the porch was completely clear. When I looked out the glass, the porch was empty, but my eyes immediately caught a strange detail further down the driveway. The interior dome light inside my car was turned on. I focused my eyes and squinted through the darkness, and that was when I noticed that my driver's side door was slightly ajar. Now, I was not scared, but I was incredibly angry. This was not the first time a drunk patron from the bar had tried to rummage through my car to find loose change or valuables. The joke was entirely on them, because I never kept anything of value inside my vehicle. But the last time this had happened, the intruder had left the door open all night, which drained my car battery and left me stranded the next morning. I did not want to deal with a dead battery again. I unlocked my front door, stepped out onto the porch, and quickly walked down the driveway to my car. I carefully peered into the back seat through the window to make sure no one was hiding or sleeping back there. Once I was absolutely sure the car was completely empty, I shut the door firmly, locked it with my key fob, and headed back inside the house. The moment I stepped through the front door and locked it behind me, a very strong, distinct scent hit my nose. It was the heavy, sweet smell of lavender perfume. It was incredibly potent, almost suffocating. I thought for a second that maybe it was Hila's perfume. But Hila was not the type of person to wear perfume at all, and there was no way a scent would have lingered in the air for over 3 hours after she left. My next logical thought was that whoever had knocked on my door earlier must have been wearing an excessive amount of perfume, and the scent had somehow drifted through the cracks of the door and settled in the entryway. I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, shut down my laptop, turned off my video game console, and decided to finally head to bed. I still felt a lingering sense of anxiety, but I was not truly afraid. I lay down in bed, put a movie on my television to help me fall asleep, and tried to relax. I do not know how much time passed, but I suddenly heard a faint noise that made me freeze. I immediately muted the television so I could listen with absolute focus. I could hear what sounded like light, delicate footsteps rapidly running around the hardwood floors of the house, just outside my closed bedroom door. The footsteps were moving incredibly fast, dinking back and forth. I slowly slid out of bed, crept over to the door, and pressed my ear against the wood. That was when I heard the unmistakable sound of a soft, feminine giggle. Hearing that giggling, combined with the sound of someone actively running through my home, sent a wave of absolute terror through my body. I quietly pushed my bedroom door fully shut, turned the lock, and immediately dialed the police. I whispered to the dispatcher that an intruder had broken into my house and was running around outside my bedroom, and that I believed it was someone from the bar next door. While I waited for the police to arrive, Every single second felt like an entire hour. The running noises eventually stopped, and the house fell into a deathly silence. I knew I could not just sit there waiting like a target, so I decided to defend myself. I crept over to my closet, grabbed one of my dad's heavy metal golf clubs, and slowly unlocked my bedroom door. I began to creep down the dark hallway, holding the golf club tightly in both hands. When I reached the entrance of the kitchen, my entire body froze in absolute horror. Standing right in the middle of my kitchen was a small blonde woman. She was facing away from me, staring intently out of the window into the dark backyard. She was wearing an incredibly dirty, tattered pink dress. In an instant, the realization hit me like a physical blow. This was the exact same woman from the bar who had waved at me and blown me a kiss earlier that night. Before I could even open my mouth to say a word, she spoke in a calm, eerie voice. Without even turning around to look at me, she simply said, "Hey buddy, I know you're there." A split second later, she snapped her head around with terrifying speed, locked her eyes onto mine, and began to sprint directly at me. I screamed, spun around, ran into the nearby bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. A second later, she began violently pounding on the wood, crying and begging me to open the door and let her in. Thankfully, it was not long after this that I heard the heavy, commanding knocks of the police officers at my front door. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked out, finding the officers already inside the house. The woman was nowhere to be seen, but when I looked down at the floor directly outside the bathroom door, my stomach churned. Lying on the hardwood floor was one of my sharpest steak knives, which she had taken from my kitchen block. As we searched the rest of the house, we discovered that my back door was standing wide open. She must have heard the police sirens approaching and fled out into the dark woods. The very next day, I went over to the bar and spoke with the owner, asking if he recognized the description of the woman. He knew exactly who she was right away. He told me she was a severely unstable transient woman who had been wandering around the area. She had entered the bar earlier that night, looking dirty and actively harassing the customers, which forced him to eventually throw her out. She had lingered around the exterior of the property for a while, but once he threatened to call the authorities, she disappeared. I never saw that woman again after that night, and for that I am incredibly thankful. I still do not know why she chose to target me, whether it was drugs, mental illness, or something else entirely. I spent a long time trying to figure out exactly how she managed to slip inside my home. The only possible window of time was when I went outside to shut my car door. She must have been hiding in the dark shadows of the bushes right next to my porch, and the moment I walked down the driveway with my back turned, she slipped through my open front door and hid inside the house. I will never forget the terror of that night, and I just hope she finally got the professional help she so desperately needed. And finally, we come to the third story, which is perhaps the most lingering and personal nightmare of all. I have spent the vast majority of my adult life being completely alone. That is not a negative reflection on my family, my friends, or any of my past romantic relationships. It is simply a personal truth. I have always been someone who thrives and feels most at peace when I am entirely on my own. Whenever I tried dating in the past, I would inevitably end up ending the relationship before things got too serious. This is not a pity party, and I do not feel sad about it. It is just the way I have always preferred to live my life. Because I was able to completely focus on myself and my career, I was able to build my own successful design company from the ground up. My job as an interior decorator allows me to travel all over the world, meeting fascinating clients and helping them bring their creative visions to life. I am currently in my mid-30s, and for the very first time in my life, I have a roommate. Last year, something happened to me in my own home, and now, I never want to be left alone in a house ever again. After years of hard work and saving every penny, I was finally able to purchase my absolute dream home. I moved into the beautiful house about 6 months before the events of this story took place. By this point in my career, I was fortunate enough to be able to be highly selective with the clients I took on. Because of the high demand for my services, I had to turn down a lot of projects, which allowed me to spend a major portion of my time working right from my home office. A few months after settling into my new home, I started to notice a very strange, subtle noise while I was working at my desk. I did not hear it constantly, just occasionally throughout the week. The noise was a soft, distinct shuffling sound. I know that sounds incredibly vague, but it is the best way to describe it. It sounded exactly like the noise of some creature, or someone slowly sliding a cardboard box across the floor in the room directly next to you. The shuffling was always very brief, lasting only a second or two, but it was loud enough to break my concentration every single time it occurred. The first few times I heard it, I simply brushed it off and went back to my design work. But once it started happening on a regular basis, I could no longer ignore it. One quiet afternoon, when the strange shuffling sound echoed through the house, I finally stopped what I was doing and decided to go upstairs to investigate. I remember standing completely still in the center of the upstairs hallway, holding my breath and trying to detect even the faintest sound, but the house remained dead silent. I started to feel like I was slowly losing my mind. I would hear the noise, drop my work, run up the stairs, and find absolutely nothing. Once I had thoroughly searched the rooms and proven to myself that there was no one up there, I came up with a logical explanation. I decided that it had to be squirrels or some other small pests that had managed to find a way into the siding of the house. Anyone who has ever had squirrels get under their roof knows how incredibly annoying and loud they can be. They can run around at all hours of the night and cause a massive amount of expensive structural damage. Once I settled on the squirrel theory, my mind was finally at ease for a little while. I figured I would just call an exterminator whenever I had a free moment in my busy schedule. The shuffling noises continued for several more days. Every single time I heard the sound, I would write myself a small sticky note to remind myself to call pest control. But because I had so many client deadlines on my plate, dealing with the potential pests was at the very bottom of my priority list. A few nights later, I ended up working much later than I normally did. I did not shut down my computer and get into bed until well after 2 o'clock in the morning. As I lay there in the dark, trying to quiet my mind and fall asleep, the distinct shuffling sound suddenly echoed from above. This was the very first time I had ever heard the noise at night. I tried to ignore it and close my eyes, but this particular shuffling sound felt different. Usually, it was just a quick, isolated slide, but now it sounded like continuous, slow movement. It annoyed me so much that I actually got out of bed, stood up on my mattress, and pressed my ear directly against the plaster ceiling to listen closely. The shuffling sound stopped immediately, but what I heard next was a million times worse. I swear I could hear the faint, steady sound of human breathing. Just thinking that seemed completely ridiculous to me, and I tried to convince myself I was just hearing things. But then, I remembered that my house had a small crawl space located directly above my bedroom. It was a very small, cramped attic space that was difficult to access, so I had never used it for storage, or even looked inside it since buying the house. The terrifying realization hit me that this crawl space was positioned directly over my bed. If that was indeed human breathing I was hearing, the implications were horrifying. Even though I was filled with fear, a small part of me still believed I was just dealing with a family of squirrels. I decided to gather my courage and at least inspect the crawl space. The entry hatch was located in the hallway ceiling, with a pull-down string that released a wooden ladder. The string was normally wrapped around a small hook next to the closet door. Because I am on the shorter side, I had to grab a heavy wooden chair from the kitchen and stand on it just to reach the string. I grabbed the cord and pulled down hard, thinking the mechanism might be rusted or jammed. Finally, the hatch released, and the wooden ladder folded down. I slowly climbed up the steps, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. I did not realize how truly terrified I was until my head cleared the opening of the dark ceiling. I was holding a flashlight, quickly scanning the cramped, dusty space. I did not see anything out of the ordinary, just the massive wooden support beams running along each side of the crawl space. Feeling silly and wanting to escape the dark, I quickly climbed down, folded the ladder back up, and shut the hatch. I went straight into the living room, turned on all the lights, and switched on the television. I was far too shaken to sleep. I just kept imagining a person hiding in the pitch black of that crawl space, silently crouching behind one of those thick wooden beams. At least with the bright light of the television, I could try to distract myself from my spiraling thoughts. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy, and I began to drift off to sleep on the couch. But while I was in a light sleep, a sharp metallic sound snapped me wide awake. It sounded exactly like the creaking of a door being slowly opened. The sound was so jarring that I sat up instantly, scanning every corner of the dark living room. I did not see or hear anything at first. I slowly stood up and took a few cautious steps into the kitchen, but everything looked completely undisturbed. I walked out of the kitchen and entered the long hallway that led to my home office. Because the hallway was pitch black, I reached out and flipped the wall switch. I half expected to see someone standing at the very end of the hall the moment the light illuminated the space, but it was completely empty. I slowly walked down the hall, peeked into my office, and saw that everything was exactly as I had left it. After finishing my search of the ground floor, I slowly made my way back upstairs. The moment my head cleared the staircase, my heart plummeted. The pull-down string for the crawl space ladder was dangling straight down from the ceiling, and even more terrifying, the white cord was gently swaying back and forth in the still air. I stood frozen on the steps, trying to convince myself that I must have just forgotten to secure the string when I closed the hatch earlier, but deep down, I knew I had wrapped it tightly around the hook. As I walked down the upstairs hallway toward my bedroom, I noticed that my bedroom door was almost completely closed. I always, without exception, leave my bedroom door wide open so the air can circulate. When I reached out and grabbed the doorknob to push it open, the hinges let out a loud, high-pitched creak. A wave of icy panic washed over me. This was the exact creaking sound that had woken me up from my sleep on the couch just minutes ago. I reached inside, flipped on the bedroom light, and braced myself. The room looked entirely normal, with the sheets still tossed on the bed. Just as I was about to turn around and leave the room to call the police, my eyes caught a strange detail on the hardwood floor right next to my bedside table. It was a small, dark clump of dirt. I walked over, bent down on one knee, and leaned in to inspect it. And that was when, in the absolute silence of the room, I heard that faint, steady sound of breathing again. But this time, the sound was not coming from the ceiling. It was coming from directly next to me. I slowly lowered myself down, placing my palms on the floor, and peered under the bed. Lying flat on his back, staring directly into my eyes with a wide, unblinking expression, was a middle-aged man. I let out a blood-curdling scream and fell backward, scrambling frantically on my hands and knees to get away from the bed. The man did not move or try to grab me, but he opened his mouth and shouted in a loud, unsettlingly calm voice, "Hi, Julie. It's okay." I desperately tried to find my footing and run, but my legs felt completely heavy, like I was trying to sprint through deep water. The man just kept repeating those same words over and over again. It's okay, Julie." I finally managed to stand up, sprinted down the stairs, grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, ran out the front door, and got into my car. I started the engine and drove away as fast as I physically could. There was a 24-hour diner located about 2 miles from my neighborhood. I pulled into the parking lot, ran inside in complete hysterics, and begged the staff for help. I called the police, and they immediately dispatched a patrol car to the diner to check on me, while several other officers rushed to my house. By the time the police entered my home, the man was completely gone. They conducted a thorough search of the entire property, including the crawl space. While they did not find the intruder, they found clear evidence of his prolonged stay. Behind one of the wooden support beams in the crawl space, they found several empty plastic water bottles, food wrappers, and a small, dirty pillow. He had been living directly above my head for weeks. I was too terrified to return to my home, so I ended up staying in a local motel for nearly a month while my company installed an incredibly expensive, state-of-the-art surveillance system with motion detectors on every single window and door. It has been over a year since that night, and that man has never resurfaced. I still do not know where he went, but the thought that he is still out there somewhere, walking the streets, is always in the back of my mind. I do have a terrifying theory about his identity, though. My dad used to have an old family friend whom he had to cut off and ban from our lives years ago because the man had developed an extremely inappropriate and creepy obsession with me when I was younger. When I looked under the bed that night, the man's face looked like a much older, more weathered version of that former friend. If it was indeed him, or if it was a complete stranger, the most horrifying part is that he knew my name, he knew where I lived, and he managed to slip into my home and live in my crawl space without me ever knowing. It It made me realize that sometimes even locking your doors and windows is not enough if someone is truly determined to get inside. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.